tonight we have tonight for Pascal and I, because we are both in Asia at the moment. I will introduce Pascal. Pascal is a researcher in tropical soil ecology and biological resource management. So Pascal is affiliated to the French Institute of Research for Development, and his lab is located both in Paris at the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Sciences, Paris Sorbonne University. And at the moment, Pascal is located at ITC at Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Pascal is a soil ecologist, and his research focuses on the ecosystem services provided by soil biodiversity, but also on the services soil invertebrates provide to humankind in terms of food security and access to health. Logically, bioturbators are organisms of great interest for Pascal. Mainly only in the tropics. So Pascal is going to tell us that now. So Pascal, thanks for giving this talk to the Nereis Park seminar. You're welcome to do that.
Thank you very much for this introduction. So so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, perhaps if you are like us in Asia. So I'm very delighted to give this short presentation about our work, the work of our team on soil bioturbation, and I try to link bioturbation, so in soil, and ecosystem services, and try to give you some examples. So in this presentation is built around three different questions. So the first is that what is bioturbation in soil, and how does this impact soil and water dynamics? And then I'll give you some examples of ecosystem services impacted by bioturbation. Speak about erosion in northern Vietnam, human health in the lower Mekong Basin, in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. Speak about the preservation of cultural heritage with the Angkor temples. And finally, I'll even try to link bioturbation and the spiritual enlightenment, you can see So when we usually talk about biodiversity, we focus on very charismatic species such as tigers, monkeys, elephants, or even turtles. But most of the biodiversity is in fact in the soil. So some specialists consider that it's about 1/4 of the life, all the life or the diversity you can find on Earth. So it's a huge amount of the diversity, and without including all the species that are depending directly or indirectly from a soil. The problem is that in soil we have too many unknown species, and of course not enough specialists for their identification. In addition, they share a very poorly understood habitat, very poorly understood and very dynamic also habitat. So the solution we found is to simplify and to use concepts to understand and to understand the soil system and its the biodiversity it hosts. One of the most classical approaches is to consider the diversity of organisms depending on their size. So we classify organisms into microfauna, so the smallest one, meso and macrofauna. The macrofauna is for us organisms larger than 2 millimeters. But we understand easily that the spider and an earthworms are totally different organisms. They don't play the same role. So here the size won't be related to the function that the organisms will perform or impact. So another approach is to focus on their functional impact. And we usually differentiate three different kinds of ecological functions. The two first are related to the nutrient cycling, the decomposition of soil organic matter. The second is the trophic regulation, so how the organisms will impact the food web, the diversity of the community of the other organisms in soil. And the third one is associated to the functions related to the dynamics of soil and water in the structure of the soil. All the organisms, micro, meso, and macrofauna, are impacting the two first functions, the nutrient cycling and trophic regulation functions. And they are usually considered regulators in comparison to the microbes that are considered as chemical engineers. So all the organisms in soil impact in a way or another the nutrient cycling, the regulation of the trophic regulation, and then indirectly via, for example, the stimulation of microbes and the production of polysaccharides, they impact indirectly the soil structure. But we have a group, the bioturbators or soil engineers. I can come back later to this, how we consider differently these two different groups. So the bioturbators are some species from the macrofauna group. So they are mostly earthworms and termites, but in some situations they can be ants, millipedes, coleopteras as well. So they, of course, impact the nutrient cycling and trophic regulation functions like the others, but in addition, they impact the dynamic of the soil structure. And by doing so, they impact the diversity of what we call subordinate organisms. So it can be microbes, but mesofauna or other species of macrofauna group. And then indirectly also impact the nutrient cycling and trophic regulation. So it's both a direct and indirect impact due to this influence on the dynamic of the soil structure. What's interesting with this approach is that we can easily relate these ecological functions to ecosystem services. One example is, for example, the regulation of the carbon sequestration, for example, that can be related to the nutrient cycling and soil organic matter decomposition, the regulation of pests with a trophic regulation, or the resistance of the soil to erosion, or even the water availability and quality based on their impact on the dynamic of the soil structure. So now let's talk more in detail about soil bioturbation. So when I talk about the bioturbation, when I introduce the concept, I usually talk about the Sari's law. Sari for selection, alteration, reorganization, incorporation, and interactions. So the key idea is that organisms, earthworms, termites, will bring the soil from one state and change it, and the soil will reach reach another state, another level, other properties. So let's see more in detail what is behind this Sari law. So selection. So most of the time, organisms, at least earthworms and termites, select clay or the smallest particles in soil, so clay, and accumulate them in their structure. So the structures can be the earthworm casts, so the soil aggregates produced by earthworms, or it can be even termite constructions, termite mounds, so you can see on the right. So on the left, you can see an example showing that, so you have on the y-axis, I don't know if you see the arrow, but on the left, the chart on the left, you have the y-axis, it's an accumulation of clay in comparison with the surrounding soil. You see that this accumulation of clay is the highest when the soil is the sandiest. So the less we have clay and the more earthworms will tend to increase the amount of clay in their casts. And we have the same trend with termites, which accumulate clay also in their construction. So they can go very deep in the soil profile, several meters deep, and collect specific soil properties, so mostly clay, and bring them to the surface and accumulate in their construction. So we usually find more clay, and this clay and the more the soil is sandy, and the more they will bring this clay and accumulate it on their construction. And below is another example with two different situations, and we see in gray the soil, the surrounding soil, and in red the termite construction. In both situations, that's the termite mound you see on the right. So in both situations, you have an accumulation of clay. Alteration. So as far as I know, there isn't so many papers, so many studies on this. But here are two examples with earthworms on the left and termites on the right. And what's interesting is that these two organisms have totally different, opposite impacts on the clay. So in the first example on the left, so you see that in the blue you have the impact of earthworms, so the soil plus earthworm, in the purple, just the soil. And what you can see here is that you have a decrease of the peak corresponding to the amount of smectite in the soil. Probably because of a loss of calcium or perhaps water in the interlayers, so in between the clay layers. And on the right, you have an example with termites. And here you have exactly the opposite. So you have on the control, the spectra on the left, and on the right, you have the different, you have the spectra with when the soil has been re-handled, walked by termites, and you see the presence of peaks that couldn't be seen with the control. And that suggests the presence of new interstratified elite and smectite clay, probably because of an incorporation of calcium or water in between the layers. So we have earthworms that remove and termites that bring, so totally opposite. Reorganization. Reorganization is maybe the part that is the most studied. So here's an example, a recent example from a study where we reared ants in different environments. So in a room temperature or in a temperature where it was a bit warmer until very warm. And what we can see is that the structure of the nest, so it's measured by X-ray tomography. So the structure of the nest is function of the temperature and so you have the mild temperature on the top, that's the room temperature, and then the medium and high temperature. And you see the complexity, the presence of the chambers, the depth, the length of the nest is function of these specific conditions. And in addition, what can be observed that it's not only an excavation of soil from the lower part, from, for example, from when they built their chamber, it's also a displacement of, they move the soil inside the soil. So, for example, you see on the right here in blue, a chamber that has been refilled. So in fact, you have excavation of soil, so it's easy to see, to identify, but also some movement inside the soil due to this activity of ants. Reorganization, another example. So here in a specific study where we installed inside the soil some columns, and this column, so the soil was totally repacked, so it's without large macropores, and we installed these columns in France, in 5 sites, in Tunisia, but it didn't work, and in India and Southeast Asia, so Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. And what we observe is after 1 year, we collected the columns and we looked at the diversity of the diversity in the abundance of macropores. And the first conclusion is that we could expect higher bioturbation in the tropics, so then higher, more biopores when the temperature is where the temperature is the warmest. But we don't find this relationship. So, for example, in Avignon, in France, in the south of France, is where we found a lot of activity. While in Chambord, a little bit more in the north, but still in France, a very low activity. In the tropics, in Konkan, this is in Thailand, very low activity. While not so far from this, in Vietnam or in Laos, a huge activity. So the answer is not that it's not because of this temperature that we'll have a higher bioturbation and a higher activity of organisms. It's really dependent on maybe the land use or maybe the specific properties of the soil and then the abundance of the diversity of organisms that are available, that are present in sites. Here's another example showing that these galleries, these burrows produced here by earthworms, are long-lasting. We measured the evolution of the porosity during the aging of the burrows, so different dates, and we related that properties to the impact of the burrows on water infiltration. Two different situations in a woodland and in a meadow. So in a woodland, we observe that the structure, the porosity evolved with the time, but slowly, but it didn't impact the water infiltration. So the burrows made by earthworms increased the water infiltration and whatever the age of the burrow. But in the middle, we observe a slight decrease. So we had initially a huge impact, positive impact on water infiltration. And then slowly, step by step, because of the alteration, the degradation of the burrow, we observe a decrease in the positive impact on water infiltration. Incorporation. So here are two examples with earthworms, for example. So we compared here that's what you can see are in fact aggregates, small size aggregates. You have the control, the surrounding soil, and the cast. So the soil that has been produced by earthworms. And what we observe that the first result is of course a huge presence of particulate organic matter. So much more organic matter, particulate organic matter in the cast, and even after 1 year, still a lot of particulate organic matter in the cast. So a long-lasting effect. If there is no degradation of the cast, this particulate organic matter is well protected and inside the cast. And below another example showing that the soil re-entered by termites has very specific properties. And such as while the soil was quite acid, we observed in the soil re-entered by termites the presence of carbonate, calcium carbonate. That's what you can see here, CF or carbonate, and even the presence of salt crystals that couldn't be found, that were not observed in the control in surrounding soil. So we have an incorporation of some of the elements that are consumed by termites and that are released in their constructions. Interactions. So of course, our bioturbators impact the soil properties at different spatial and temporal scales, from the clay properties to the aggregates, the mound and the soil profile, and the landscape. So they produce biostructures and biopores at different scales. And at each scale, they impact also other organisms such as microbes, the fauna, and the plants, as well as the interaction between these different organisms. That's what I call interactions. So time flies. I don't know exactly. Yes, 24. So now a few examples about bioturbation and ecosystem services. The first example is about soil erosion in Vietnam. So in Vietnam, you have approximately 75% of the surface that is covered by hills or mountains. So erosion is a really a key issue in this country. The mismanagement of soil can have huge consequences in terms of soil loss. So in this, because of the humidity, the properties of the soil and so on, in this environment, we can find a huge production of casts produced by earthworms. So here are some examples. And of course, you have the cast, but also very intricate and very interesting interactions with plants. So here you see some examples with the roots that can be found that proliferate inside the burrow. Yeah. So what is the impact of this bioturbation, huge bioturbation on the ground, on the soil surface? So to answer to this question, we carried out several experiments. Here's the result of one of them. So we isolate some surfaces, some area where we follow, in fact, the evolution of the soil structure. And what we observe is that so W, S, and M are for meadow, shrubland, and woodland, so different environments that can be found in the catchment where we carried out this experiment. And what we observed that in 2 years and a half, the soil, we had an accumulation of soil of about approximately 7 centimeters. So it's a 3.5 centimeter of soil that has been produced per year. So it's more or less more than 3 times more than what has been found in a temperate environment. So a huge production of soil and the creation even of a new soil layer, a new soil horizon. So in another way, we could even say, if we have a look on this production of soil at the catchment scale, we arrive to a production of cast equivalent to about 35 tons per hectare and per year. So a huge production of soil that can be compared to the erosion rate, so the amount of soil that is lost at the catchment scale, and that reach the year of the experiment about 3 tons per hectare and per year. So we have a huge production of soil and much more than a loss of soil. So in another way, we could say that because of these biological activities, this bioturbation, we had a growth of the mountain. We also measured the resistance of the soil to erosion using rainfall simulation. So here are some examples, some results. We found very quickly, so that on the right, you see that the more we had cast on the soil, and the less we had a crust. So the sealing of the soil that is associated to the water runoff and erosion. So the more we had cast, the more was the roughness of the soil, and the more we had water infiltration, and the less we had soil loss. So a positive impact of this bioturbation by earthworms on soil erosion, on the resistance of the soil to erosion. But surprisingly, we also found termite sheetings, so soil blocked by termites, and that covered the leaves. And the more we had termites on termite sheetings on the ground, and the more we had crust, and the more we had soil loss. So a positive impact of earthworms, but a negative one of termites. Now we'll change. We'll go to the lower Mekong Basin. So this area that include the Laos, part of the Laos, Thailand, the northeast of the Thailand, Cambodia, and the south of Vietnam. So in this environment, except in the south of Vietnam, where all of them have disappeared, they have vanished, but you can find many mounds. Call them termite mounds. In fact, it's a bit more complex than that. It's due at the beginning we have termite activity. They produce mounds, and then after it's the colony dies. It's occupied by many species. Plants are growing on the system. So, but we have a mound, very complex mound system. So there can be several cubic meters of soil in the middle of the paddy field. So you can find this structure especially in Cambodia, in Laos, and a bit less in Thailand. So we measure the properties of these mounds, and we found that they are usually, we compare the lenticular mounds, so the mound in itself, to the termite nest, really the soil built by termites, recently built by termites. So we know that it's only termites that produce the nest. And we observe a higher amount of carbon, higher amount of phosphorus, nitrogen, and depending on the environment, also higher present amount of clay. So make it short, this bioturbation, this presence of termite mounds can lead to the presence of patches of fertility in the cultivated areas. So that's what we. That's why farmer, in fact, that's what you see on the left. Farmer, they know that these patches constitute patches of fertility. So they are islands of fertility in the middle of very sandy soil, so very soil with a very low fertility. And because they know that the soil is rich in terms of nutrients, so they sometimes in some environments they like prune the mound, so they don't kill the species, the termites living inside the mound. They just cut and use the soil and spread the soil in their environment to increase the fertility of their land. These patches are not only patches of fertility, they are also patches of biodiversity. And you can easily see on the right and understand that when everything is flooded, the only place where organisms can find places to survive are the termite mounds. Everything is under the water except here. And during the dry season, it's the opposite. Everything is very dry. There is no humidity. It's very hard, harsh environment for organisms. But below but in the mounds, so you have more humidity because of you have higher porosity also, but because of the presence of the trees, you have some shadow and more humidity, and for these reasons, so they provide a refuge for many organisms. The farmers can also use these mounds to produce other kind of food. And so the mounds can be used to increase the food diversity and security. They can grow different kind of vegetables on the mound. And because it's a refuge for biodiversity, you have many insects or mushrooms that are consumed locally by the farmers. So some positive impact on food security and diversity. And finally, so it's less known and less studied, we can also imagine some cultural goods with, for example, you can see on the left, on the right, top right, the presence of mounds, soil rocked by termites, covering the kind of pagoda, and below the presence of a steel at the bottom of the root of the foot of the termite construction. So now another example. I'll try to speak about bioturbation, the preservation of anchor temples. First, when I arrived in Anchor, I thought about the roots that are protecting the construction, the structure, the stones. So imagine, because of these specific properties of termite soils, so termite constructions, I could imagine that termites increase in a way the stability of these constructions, a bit like the roots, and even reduce this decay of the stone because of the hydrolysis. But what I observed finally in the field was exactly the opposite. It's true that sometimes termites can build mounds. That's what you can see on the left. That help stabilize here it's a wall, so it can help to stabilize the wall that is going to fall. But most part of the time we observe the opposite. You can see here in the middle, so you have a kind of portal, a door, and here an accumulation of soil blocked by termites. So the termites, they bring soil, and this pushes slowly but surely, it pushes the soil the construction, and it makes the system very fragile, and may even cause it to collapse. That's what you see here below, a huge accumulation, several cubic meters of soil that can be found inside the temples with stones on the floor, on the ground, or above the termite constructions. So a huge negative impact. In addition, the clay, so you see sometimes some accumulation of soil in between in the gap in between the stones. And since we have a clay enrichment, as I told you before, the termites select the clay and bring that in their soil. So this clay enrichment is in fact likely to cause the soil to swell during the periods, during the wet periods, and to shrink during the dry season. And this movement of soil, because of the swelling and shrinking behavior of the soil, along with the hydrolysis of the stone in contact with the soil brought by termites, leads to the deterioration, the decay of the structures and the building. So again, a rather negative impact of this bioturbation. And to conclude, last example. So I tried to show you that bioturbation can impact positively or negatively different ecosystem services, key ecosystem services, associated, so provisioning services, supporting and regulating services. But bioturbation can also impact some cultural services. And that's what you can see if you travel to India. You can sometimes see some fabrics and powder covering some termite constructions, and even people praying, worshipping some gods or the termite construction. So of course, it's not the termite that is worshipped. There are, as far as I know, two reasons why people behave like that and give offerings to the mount. The first is that termites are not only bioturbators, they're also ecosystem engineers. So when they produce a habitat for other organisms, and when the colony dies, it's often colonized or used by snakes. And the snakes is associated to Shiva. So the people through these bioturbation, through these mounts, in fact, they worship one of the most important gods in Hinduism. Another reason is related to the story of Valmiki. So Valmiki is a myth. Valmiki is, before to be Valmiki, Valmiki was named Ratnakara. Ratnakara was a robber, a thief, a murderer. And one day Ratnakara met one Brahmin who teach him how to do meditation. So Ratnakara started to meditate during 100 to 1,000 years. He then got buried by the termites. The termites broke the soil on himself and slowly built a mount on him. So he got buried by the termites, and then woke up and became Valmiki. So the one born from the termite construction, the termite house. And Valmiki is very important because Valmiki is the one who wrote the Ramayana, one of the most important books in Hinduism. So that's interesting because in a way, termites and bioturbation remind us that the good and the bad, the worst and the best are related, intertwined. And then that sometimes to get the bright, we also need the dark. Okay, that was my last example. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention, and hope that it was interesting for the Nereis Park group or community. Thank you very much.